if there is legal guidance for your holistic legacy model. I'd like to welcome attorney Matthew Fornaro to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely Friday. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Angelina. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure to host you, and I believe you're joining today from the lovely city of Miami, Florida, in the United States.
Yes, I am. I'm on the East Coast. We had a discussion beforehand about East Coast versus West Coast, particularly time. So I'm here, the Eastern time zone. So
Well, I'm delighted to host you on this platform, and I imagine you're going to bring incredible value to today's conversation. I did some research regarding the prior podcast, and your wealth of knowledge. I think you've been practicing for about 23 years in South Florida. Is that correct? Or since
uh,
2003?
yes, that's correct. It's going to be 22 years coming up. Very close.
Ah, yeah. So you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And I know that in some of your prior podcasts, you mentioned the things that people needed to know during the pandemic. But I think also today, it's just a new world, a new landscape. And a lot of times people, they don't plan for the things that they don't know. They just get blindsided by them. And that's why it's a pleasure to host an attorney today on today's podcast. So let's start out with an icebreaker. Would you share anything about your legal training or your personal life experiences that brought you to where you are today to guide clients, individuals, whether they're affluent family businesses, entrepreneurs, founders, and so forth?
Sure. I would say probably the biggest influence on me being where I am today as far as my legal career would be growing up with my dad who owned a small business, and I saw what he went through as a small business owner and an entrepreneur from various standpoints, from like his business standpoint, cash flow, economics, personnel, legal, all things like that. And eventually, once I was into my legal career, I decided that that was the area I wanted to focus on, helping with small and medium-sized business owners with their and entrepreneurs with their with their legal needs, and attempting to help them achieve their business goals and I guess their dreams as a overall thing.
Yeah, I think that when somebody has a vision for their business, it's an exciting time. And then there is actually living and working in the landscape for the ins and outs every day of what to expect and just the operations and dealing with customers and competitors and all of that. And again, sometimes we don't know until, it's the school of hard knocks. And I think there's this expression that it only took me 10 years to become an overnight success, but on bump, right? So,
Yeah, no, that's
yeah,
true.
yeah. So interesting that you mentioned that one of the reasons you became an attorney was the childhood experiences of watching your parents. I mean, I know that my husband shared that his father laid roads in British Columbia, and then his father was always getting sued. And so he, as a child, had to look at the paperwork, but as a child, nobody understands it other than having a reference point of, gosh, maybe it would be good to know the legal system. Maybe it would be good to know the law.
No, it's true. Obviously the average kid who's reading a lawsuit or a contract doesn't know what's going on legally or whatever, but I mean it puts the seed in your head that someday maybe you do want to know what's going on, and then there it is. It happens someday.
Yeah, yeah. Life is funny. All right, so let's start out with what are some of the issues that small businesses face?
Well, it's generally small businesses face obviously a lot of issues, but a lot of them are very similar, um, to each other, and similar basically in, let's say, the startup phase is that a lot of businesses don't have like a written business plan as far as put together, as far as, what they foresee the business to be, what their goals are, what kind of business it's going to be, who's going to be in the business, where they're going to get money from, how they're going to pay money, things like that. So at the startup, that's missing. At the startup, a lot of governing documents are missing because people are just ready to jump into business. So they're missing like articles of incorporation for a corporation or an operating agreement for an LLC. And then another thing that they're missing is contracts. So when they getting contracts with vendors or service providers, a lot of it's just, based on an invoice or based on, I send you a payment link and that's it. So a lot of that stuff is missing initially from the startup of the business, and that's what contributes to problems or potential problems down the road. So that would be, I would say, the biggest thing that a startup or a new business has, is not having those documents in place, not having that plan in place. For an ongoing business, I would say that it's just having those documents refined and up to date as far as it's, I don't want to say living and breathing document, but it is. You want to update those documents as time goes on because things change, people change, business concepts change, and things like that. So keeping those documents up to speed and then just seeing I mean, you have a cadre of professionals at your disposal, and you need to make sure that you're using them as opposed to trying to do it yourself. So you need to see a business law attorney, you need to see an accountant, you need to see a banker, and have them perform their roles in helping you and your business and your focus achieve whatever your goals are.
Yeah, absolutely. A meeting of the minds consistently, no matter if the month changes, the year changes, because you're right, the landscape and the baseline, they're going to change with the times. I mean, technology comes into the picture and there's a lot of different moving parts. I know one of the other points you brought up is this idea of when friendships are tested. So there can be a group of individuals and emotions can be high. They're excited about a business, and yet when money comes in, money is very interesting because money, like success, is a magnifier. And so, would you say more about this when friendships are tested?
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone, it's great that you want to go into business with your friends. It's great your friends maybe have the same idea, but nothing's going to test your friendship like going into business together. And if you do decide to go into business, I'd say think long and hard because if you value that friendship may go out the window if things go wrong with your business or even if things go right with your business. So make sure you figure out that paradigm that is this really the person I want to be in business with and jeopardize that friendship, jeopardize, I mean, a childhood relationship with your best friend or, someone you met in high school or college. Do you want to jeopardize that for your business? And if the answer is yes, then you got to go back to what I just said before about making sure all those documents and everything are in place to show who does what in the business, to make sure that this person owns this percentage and does this, and this person owns this percentage and does that, and that this person brings this to the business and this person brings that to the business, so that everyone has very specific defined roles, so that way during the course of the business, when there's issues that pop up, because there will be issues that pop up, that you have a solution in hand that says who's supposed to do what, so then it doesn't turn into a playing game and it doesn't stress your friendship any more than it needs to be stressed.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point to bring up because there are expectations as well as presumptions. And somebody can go into that business, whether again it's a family business or a group of friends coming together because they've got a great idea for a product and service. And yet when I think, okay, well, Matthew, I presume you're going to take care of that because you're good at that. And you might not want to do it. And then you might be resentful. And I think that's also one of the things that happens when there is, like you had said, there's a need to record everything formally, because if it's not clarified and people think, well, my friend has to take care of that because they're good at it, or I don't want to do it. And therefore, all the personality traits come to the surface. Because again, when money is involved, whether it's the money coming in and the entitlement of the profits and how they're going to be spent or who's going to spend it, or when there's not enough profits coming in and there's payroll and overhead expenses, or people have put themselves out on debt just to make, the startup work.
No, it's true. I mean, that's why everyone has to have a defined role because if you kind of ad hoc do things, you're going to ad hoc have problems. Because if someone brings in money and that's not their job, or someone, tries to assume management of something that's not their job, then you're going to have, I mean, as much as everyone has good intentions, wants to stay in business, wants to stay friends, you're going to have issues. So that's why it's very important to have those governing documents and make sure you abide by them 100%.
Yeah. So let's talk lawsuits for a moment. So you've worked with a number of small businesses over the years. What is common and what should an individual do when they're served that moment?
Sure. So, most of what I deal with is called commercial litigation, which is just disputes over contracts and things of that nature. Generally, when someone owes someone money, someone uh, is seducing or they didn't do something or something like that, it comes down to breach of contract. So, although I deal with other, you know, statutory and all kinds of other lawsuits too. But if for businesses, that's generally the thing, is that it's a breach of contract lawsuit, whether it's with a landlord tenant, a vendor, an employee, someone like that. It always comes down to contracts. So my first piece of advice, if you want me to loosely give advice, is when you're served with a lawsuit, you need to take it 100% seriously. And it's not like a bill that you just throw to the side that you take care of whenever, because there's a very strict time period that you have to respond to lawsuits. Here in Florida, it's 20 days. So that's 20 days. That's not 20 business days. That's 20 days from the day you're served. So you have to respond to it. Otherwise, you will be defaulted, you will lose, and a judgment will be entered against you. So what I generally say is when it's a lawsuit, the first thing you need to do is contact your insurer to see if your insurance will cover the lawsuit for you. So most of the time, if you have general liability insurance, if you have business insurance, if you have, workers' compensation insurance or something like that, and someone sues you for that, much of the time, your insurance company will pick up the tab and defend you for that because that's part of your insurance policy. So a lot of people, when they get served, they think they're going to have to pay out of pocket and they go hire an attorney. And then the attorney is just like, oh, I'll gladly take this case. And they don't really think that it should be the insurance company that handles it. So always give your lawsuit first thing possible to your insurance company. Make sure they acknowledge receipt of it, they acknowledge a time frame, and they acknowledge that they're going to review and give it back to you. Because like I said, if the insurance company covers it, then you're playing with the house's money as far as defending the lawsuit. If they come back and say there is no coverage, then you have to go out and hire someone like me to come in and defend the lawsuit, and you have to pay for it yourself. So the eternal vigilance is kind of the message when you're served with a lawsuit, is that you can't mess around. There's no, oh, I forgot about it, I'll put it off to next week. I mean, like, today is like a quasi, like we're in the middle of holidays right now. If you're served with a lawsuit today, there's no, oh, it was Christmas or it was New Year's. Those don't, those days count. So you need to get it in the hands of someone to say either they're going to defend you or not. And then if not, put it in the hands of another attorney who's going to say they're going to defend you or not. And, that's it. I mean, it's just due diligence following through. A lot of people, or a lot of companies I know, kind of put off responding to a lawsuit, even though it unequivocally says you have to respond within 20 days right on it, for whatever reason, or they don't think about sending it to their insurance company, or they just kind of an accountant and be like, oh, could you look at this or whatever. So got to take it seriously. You got to be very diligent with it. And then, it goes from there.
That's great advice. So, what is common for small business owners? Is it issues that come up with bills, with profit sharing? Is it like what have you seen in
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's bills. A lot of it's like for commercial spaces, like commercial landlord tenant issues. A
Mm,
lot of it's infighting with people within your company. So whether it's someone who you thought was your quote unquote partner is at odds with you in a business, or whether it's an employee who now you have problems with, whether it's related to wages or whether they're going off and competing against you. Um, and then vendor issues. You paid for someone to give you a bunch of stuff and they didn't give it to you, or that what they gave you was not great. So those are probably the biggest lawsuits that the average small business faces.
yeah, and it's also a really big deal because small businesses they only have so much in terms of their working capital. And so every cent counts. It's interesting that you bring up landlord tenant matters because I was a commercial real estate broker before I did legacy planning, and there were so many times where there would be moments where the tenant would pay for the tenant improvements, and it could have been a compounding pharmacy, could have been a retail space, and yet then the landlord wanted to not renew the lease 3 or 5 years later down the road, and the tenant said, "Wait a minute, I just put in $100,000 to update the space,
Yeah.
tenant improvements, and now I'm out."
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's one of the issues that businesses face is, particularly with commercial landlords. is that the landlord's going to hold all the cards and dictate what's going on. And they like to do things like make you pay for common area maintenance and, capital improvements and things like that. And then you get no credit for it, or, your lease isn't renewed. And then magically the same business that you just had comes in and moves in and takes over for you. So,
Yeah, thanks a lot, landlord, as I was building my
yeah.
momentum. But you mentioned that in contract negotiation, there can be a benefit to a force majeure clause in two tests in Florida. So would you speak more on this? Because it's probably just not Florida. This might be good knowledge, whether somebody is in California, Texas, or even overseas.
Sure. So, force majeure is like it's a term that means like, force of, some kind of outside force, like a natural force or something that comes in and affects your contract. So whether it's act of God, here in South Florida, hurricanes, earthquakes, pandemics, for instance. There's a lot of the whole COVID thing. There's all kinds of cases, whether a pandemic is force majeure or something like that. So you want to take into account the things that, the acts of God, so you can't foresee that would affect your landlord tenancy. So, for instance, like I said, down here, 100% hurricanes. Hurricanes can knock out a building. Hurricanes, can really mess with your business. So that's why you want to put that as in the force majeure clause, or if you're, in an area where there's a lot of snow or something like blizzard things where there could be snow damage, like your roof can collapse, something like that. If you're in an area with earthquakes, and then even based on what I just said, like COVID, I mean, a lot of people now want to put in there like pandemics or, things like that in their force majeure clause, because that's something that you can really foresee that just happens that affects the status of the contract.
Yeah, I think you have talked about this area of reasonable power as well as what is deemed to be foreseeable. And I think as the world changes and more weather events come to the forefront and the weather is more extreme, I bet this is an
Yeah,
area that's an
yeah.
absolute clause that's going to be included in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's also things like that and things like technology. Like, for instance, if, you know, your technology, your internet server, whatever, gets knocked out, I mean, that's something that you couldn't foresee, or maybe you should have foreseen that needs to be dealt with. Because if you're at like let's say you're at a location where you were, like it got hit by a hurricane or got hit by a snowstorm or whatever, and the building's okay, but all the utilities are knocked out. Well, then how are you supposed to run a business if you're whatever and you don't have electricity, or if you don't have not even electricity, even something more small and light, like internet access? Is that something that we should be looking at now? Because obviously, if you don't have internet access, 99% of businesses aren't able to function without having, linked into some network somewhere. So that's something that you got to take into account for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. With recent events in North Carolina, I heard that when the internet and the Wi-Fi went down, the individuals actually have now relied on Starlink by Elon Musk. And I thought that was
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you got to use the satellite internet, I mean, which is highly pricey. So I think Starlink's the least expensive though. But I mean, obviously, you got to stay up with, 2024, 2025. So you can't go back to, Pony Express. So you got to do something. So you kind of sidestep the whole infrastructure and you just go with like man portable internet stuff. So you stay up to date, which is, now is that something everyone has to have Starlink? Because in case you get knocked out of you knocked out from the regular internet, Starlink always, so I mean that's like something that you got to keep in mind as your business planning goes. It's like have redundant internet systems in place.
Yeah. Let's talk about websites for a moment on this theme of virtual and digital, virtual and digital world today. So, what's one piece of advice that you might share for business owners in terms of what they should have on their website? Is it a disclaimer from your perspective as an attorney, what's important when it comes to websites these days? Because it's almost like the front door to our business. Like, come on in, you know,
Yeah.
compared
Well,
to
yeah, obviously
bricks.
your website has to have all the information about your business or the services you provide or the goods you provide that you want to present to the public. So it's got to have like your message or whatever as far as from a like business standpoint, and then obviously have your correct contact information, the best way to get in touch with you, all things like that. As far as legally, yeah, you want to make sure there's disclaimers like on my website, it says that, we're not in an attorney-client relationship. Anything that you find on my website is just, for informational purposes only, something like that. Because then someone will be like, "Oh, I thought it was my attorney." So you got to watch out for things like that. Just like, for websites where maybe you provide prices or something like that, you want a disclaimer that they're not necessarily always 100% accurate because prices change or whatever. You don't want to be like a lobster salesman and selling lobster or whatever a pound, and then it went up 10 times because there was like a shortage or something. So you always want to make sure you put those disclaimers on there. And they're pretty, I mean, disclaimers are pretty general for the most part. I mean, I think at this point in time, I mean, they're pretty standard on everything. And then you want to make sure when you click on and do things that you have more disclaimers. When you click on and do things, like if you sell good, you want to make sure you have your disclaimer language and all stuff like that. And if you give advice or something, you want to make sure you have a disclaimer about that, independent from your just general disclaimer. So it's things like that that you want to put on your website.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. I mean, a few decades ago, I think McDonald's didn't have that warning that the cup of coffee could be hot and it could spill. But I think these days, every amount of language anywhere just protects the business and the business owners because you're right. How something can be construed to a customer can be completely different than what the business intended. And if one could avoid, unnecessary litigation in the United States of America today, that
Yeah.
is ideal compared to I think Europe is less litigious, but America is now the land of the lawsuits.
Yeah, no, it is. And, even if you have that cup of coffee warning, people still sue McDonald's and Starbucks all the time because stuff was too hot.
Yeah.
So even your disclaimer, as good as it is, isn't 100% bulletproof.
So before I transition over to the legacy portion of today's podcast, it sounds like if a business owner, whether they're a small business owner, a family business, or a startup, what would behoove them would be to get as much in writing, like you had said, whether it's the governing documents, the articles of incorporation, the operating agreements, and then to revisit those documents on a periodic basis, whether that's once a year or once a quarter, and also to have those disclaimers on their website. Is there any other pieces of advice in this short slice of time that I have with you that you might be able to share with the listeners and the viewers, your thoughts of how they can be proactive?
Sure. Just make sure in as many relationships as you have with whether it's employees, vendors, service providers, anything, make sure you have contracts. Rely on handshake every month an invoice and you pay it or whatever. Make sure you have a written contract as well the role responsibilities of everyone involved in the relationship is, and then has remedies provisions in it. So then when something goes wrong, you know what to do as opposed to just kind of having to figure it out yourself or, consult an attorney for it.
Yes, I would think organization is key. And also, like you had said, this personal agency, the more one is willing to do up front compared to like just tossing it to the wind, in the event that when the tragedy happens, in the event that there's a problem, we'll deal with it then. Better
Yeah.
to, yeah, to get it all squared away in the four corners. Absolutely. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, since this is the legacy podcast, what does the word legacy mean to you personally?
For me, legacy means what people or things think of you when you're not around, whether it's temporarily or permanently. So it's the legacy that you live, or the legacy that you leave, I guess, as a person, a business person, a father, a husband, of when you're not in the room, and then you, if you pay and you're not around, So it would be, general legacy and then long-term legacy.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. In 1 to 2 sentences, what would you like your holistic legacy to be?
Well, I would like my holistic legacy to be first, I guess the most important thing would be for my family, would be to make sure that I did a good job as a father and a husband and everything's okay with my kids and my wife in there. And then as a business owner, I hope that I help people and I put in a system to further help people and, assisted them in their time of need and it may be gave the nation that they're able to pay it forward going on.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I know one of the things that you've talked about in prior podcasts is this idea of backwards planning. So it's nice to hear your vision because a lot of times we don't think about the long term because we're so busy in the survival mode day to day on the mouse wheel.
Correct. Yeah, you can always, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, the things, all those documents, all those things, you can always go back and attempt to, not necessarily always, but you can go fix what you're saying and make sure that you're okay from the present going forward. If you're, it's not, you didn't start, it's not game over at the startup. It's an ongoing process that you can always fix.
Yes. So I know a lot of times legacies are thought of in terms of legal and financial documents, and I like to look at it from a holistic perspective regarding the values, core values that we can set as the pillars. So, what would you say are the top 3 or 4 core values that could be the pillars of your legacy plan?
Sure. So as far as the legacy plan to make sure everything's available, whatever. I mean, individually, it would be to make sure you have your wills and trusts or whatever in place so that, whatever happens to you, everything will be fine when there's a transition onward, so there's no problems like that. Another thing would be for businesses to make sure from your business standpoint that you have a plan of succession in place so that you don't your partners or your business affiliates or your employees or other people in your business with don't know what the hell's going on if you're not there anymore. You have a plan in place as far as personally otherwise, other than what's covered in your legacy planning documents and your wills and your trusts or whatever, just make sure you have an actual plan in place for day-to-day operations of what happens as far as what's going to be your legacy going forward, as far as who gets what where, not just in the estate governing documents, but from a daily perspective of how people can pick up and go from you being there to you not being there as far as what you leave behind. So I would say those are probably 3 or 4 best things that I would say.
Yeah. So, in terms, I'm just going to translate them for a moment to core values. So, I'm hearing preparation, foresight, fairness, practicality.
Yeah, those are, I mean, it's all, pragmaticism, things like that of just being as prepared as possible and then executing on the preparation to make sure that you have results from the preparation as far as your body of work goes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There are some estate planning attorneys that make this joke about how equal is not always fair,
Mhm.
especially when there's adult children involved and the adult offspring.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I'm sure you've had the times where you've had to put on the coaching and consultant hat when fair is not always equal.
It's true, fair is not always equal. Some people think they're entitled to more or think they deserve more or think someone deserves less or something, but that's not how the people that made the decisions made them. So you got to live with it. Or sometimes people dispute it and it gets not nice and it gets ugly.
Yeah. If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month for the next year to design a hardcover coffee table book for your personal legacy, what images, pictures, stories, best practices, or lessons might fill its pages?
That's interesting. The coffee table book. I love coffee table books. I grew up with you know, coffee table books. I used to remember when I used to go and loiter at Barnes and Noble and Borders when I was in business. I used to always like to look at the coffee table books. I always thought they were interesting. My favorite one that I actually have is a Star Trek coffee table book that I had that because I was a big nerd back in the day. My coffee table book would just have an outline or would have some pictures and stories about me growing up doing stuff, then having a family, having a bunch of other things. And I'd probably divide it into personal versus professional, where personal would have all my family stuff, me hanging out with my parents, my grandparents, and then getting married, having kids, and then professionally would start out with me through my career journey of like working for the man and then finally going out to work for myself and doing whatever. And then pictures would be just pictures of places I've lived, pictures of places I like and I go. And then that would probably be the end of my book. It'd be pretty, I don't want to say simple, but it's a pretty straightforward book.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. And I think it's important to be able to memorialize those things because even 100 years from now, just to give the next generation's idea of who Matthew Fornaro was. I just
Yeah.
think it adds to the roots and the pride regarding heritage and just knowing one's identity. And especially when the winds come and they blow someone off center, which is what
Yeah,
happens
exactly.
sometimes in life. Yeah. Um, any closing thoughts on the subject of legacy as well as a website of how a listener could reach you?
Sure. So, I mean, make sure as part of your time here that you set up what your legacy is going to be, whatever you want your legacy to be, you know, social, financial, um, philanthropic, whatever you want it to be, always be aware that your legacy is out there and you got to plan for it. So make sure you're always working on it because it's one of those that you can't put off till it's too late. You always have working. And then if people want to get a hold of me, the easiest way to get a hold of me is go to my website, which is fornarolegal.com, which is my last name, legal.com. And it's got a bunch of stuff on there. It's got all kinds of different like white papers and blogs and videos and other podcasts and other things that I see you checked out. So hopefully the people can check out. I think I have enough information on there at this point where the average business owner or person who wants to go into business or whatever, like there's enough on there where you can answer most of your major questions. And if not, just contact me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for taking the time this lovely Friday to be a guest on this platform. We started out with the intention of what if there is legal guidance for your holistic legacy model? And I think we fulfilled that business promise that we set out, that intention, as we've talked about, the eternal vigilance, whether somebody gets served with a lawsuit and they have to respond within 20 calendar days. Again, that's specific to the state of Florida. In the United States, it's going to be different depending on jurisdiction of where the listener or viewer is located, but also understanding that legacy is created here and now. And it might be what others think of you later on down the road, but it's the proactive preparation and planning that we do today. So thank you very much, Matthew, for your time.
Thank you, Angelina. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. In closing, I'm Angelina Carlson, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach and consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in today on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, please remember to rate and review. If you'd like to reach out to either Matthew or myself, send us an email and share your thoughts and feelings about today's subject matter. So thank you so much for joining us this week, and thank you, Matthew, for speaking into your legacy.